Hello all, aloha mai kako. It looks like it's still a few people are joining us, but we're going to go ahead and get started. So we have a great presentation and panel discussion for the next 90 minutes. So I'd like to start by thanking you for joining us for this REL Pacific webinar called Supporting Micronesian Students in Hawaii through Family and Community Engagement, with a special focus on the curriculum of the home. So first I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Katie Gao. I'm a managing researcher for REL Pacific at PREL International. I'm based in the Honolulu office. I will be monitoring the chat box during this webinar. So if you have any issues with your audio or Zoom functions, feel free to shoot me a direct chat. If you are for some reason disconnected, just please follow the original link on the email invitation. We ask that you keep your audio on mute and video turned off unless you would like to be seen throughout. We are recording this webinar and it will be made publicly available in the next few weeks so that anyone who's interested in this topic but unable to join today will view the webinar at a later time. Also, please use the chat box for any questions that come up during the presentation or panel discussion. We'll pose some of your questions to the panel at the end of the webinar. These will also be a good resource for us in planning upcoming events around this topic. So I'll let my collaborator and moderator of the panel discussion introduce herself.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Corinne Barros, and I work for Pacific Resources for Education and Learning, or PREL. I'm a senior specialist here, been with PREL for about 7 years now, and a large majority of my work is around science, STEM education. I've been doing a lot of work around climate change for the last 7 years, and it's been really awesome getting to work here in Hawaii, which is my home, but also getting to work with collaborators out in Micronesia, which has been really amazing. And so I'm really excited that you're all here today, looking forward to our panel discussion. Like Katie said, I'll be moderating, so you'll hear a bit from me, but a lot more from our keynote speaker in our panel. That's it for me.
Corinne, I was wondering if you have the poll ready, maybe we could get an idea of who's in our audience today. So Corinne's going to put up a poll, and if you could just check which category you fall into, and that'll help us see who's interested and also how we can maybe tailor some of the responses. So I'd also like to give you a brief overview of the REL Pacific and the work that we're engaged in. So REL Pacific at PREL International is one of 10 regional educational laboratories that are funded by the Institute of Education Sciences, which is the statistics, research, and evaluation arm of the U.S. Department of Education. In a second, Corinne, can you share that slide after this poll is done?
I'm actually
I'll answer the poll too.
I'm going to see if I can do both.
Can we do both? Let's see.
Yeah.
So Corinne's going to share a map of the region that REL Pacific serves as part of our contract with IES.
I am.
All right.
I hope it didn't take away your poll.
We can try again after. So as you can see from the map, REL Pacific is unique among the RELs in the US in the vastness and diversity found within the region that we serve, which actually spans an area larger than the mainland United States. So the REL Pacific region includes the state of Hawaii, 3 US territories, including American Samoa, Guam, and the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, as well as 3 independent nations that are in free association with the US, including the Republic of the Marshall Islands, the Federated States of Micronesia, which includes the states of Koshrai, Pohnpei, Chuuk, and Yap, and finally the Republic of Palau. So during the REL Pacific contract, which runs from 2017 through 2022, we're working with education system leaders and practitioners in each of these jurisdictions to provide evidence-based support for ongoing system improvement efforts, which are led by partnerships that are based in all of these islands. Just a side note, because the title of this webinar is Supporting Micronesian Students in Hawaii, we wanted to clarify at the start what we mean by Micronesia. So the Micronesian region it usually refers to one of two things, either the islands that are in the political boundaries of the FSM, the Federated States, or it's considered the larger sub-region of the Western Pacific Ocean, which includes thousands of islands that are encompassed in all of the entities on this map, except for American Samoa and Hawaii, which are considered part of the Polynesian region. Our expert-based, Pacific-based panelists today have worked in education and policy and advocacy in the larger Micronesian region, including FSM and the Marshall Islands, as well as with migrant populations in Hawaii. So we're really excited today to bring these different perspectives to you all who joined us. So before the panelists introduce themselves, Corinne will give you some background information specifically about Micronesian students in Hawaii and why we're hosting a webinar on family and community engagement.
Yeah. Okay, so while I talk about this, just do feel free to finish up with the poll and then I'll close it. So I wanted to share with you guys, and we want to share with you guys some numbers about just what our population of the Micronesian community looks like here in Hawaii. And the reason why we wanted to do a webinar like this to begin with is really because the composition of our classrooms here in Hawaii is changing. We're seeing a big increase in students coming from the Micronesian community, coming from Marshalese community in ways that we haven't seen before. So you can see the numbers that are on the slide right now are population numbers. So they're not student data, but this is just general population numbers. And you can see that the number of people from Micronesia and from the Marshalls has increased almost 3 times, or about 3 times in the last 15 years, which is really actually kind of exciting. For those of us in Hawaii, our new migrants bring a lot of valuable knowledge, a lot of new languages, a lot of different perspectives that can really benefit our community. So it's definitely a good thing. And a lot of people are coming because of the Compact of Free Association that the United States has with their countries that allows citizens from FSM, the Federated States of Micronesia, and the Marshall Islands to come to the US and access healthcare, public education, and jobs. So while this population is growing, our classrooms are changing, lots of new perspectives, new languages, and food. Like with every other immigrant community, there are challenges in that transition, and oftentimes those challenges come to light in the classroom when the kids are going to school and families are trying to engage with school, and it's different than what they expect. So there we go. So a lot of the challenges, these challenges in classrooms are arising from just mismatched expectations that teachers have of the children, that teachers have of the parents, and vice versa. What students are expecting of their teachers, what parents are expecting of the teachers and of the schools. Just oftentimes we are not on the same page because people are coming from different backgrounds and experiences. And a lot of these mismatched expectations, these challenges are made worse because of discrimination, because of the lack of affordable housing and the means by which people are able to meet their very basic needs. Because when that's challenging, that second tier of education becomes more difficult. So I think that's all I'll say about it, because I think that despite these challenges, and we'll dig into this a little bit more, I think that we can agree that we want our classrooms to be places where all learners can learn. All of our kids can learn, they can learn effectively, and we want our kids to grow up to be contributing citizens to our community, especially those that are coming here and are new. We want them to grow up to be contributing citizens to their new community. So there's a lot of good work here happening in the Pacific, and we're going to hear from our panelists, but there's also a lot of good work happening on the mainland US, and that's why we've invited our guest speaker here today. And we're just going to get to learn a little bit more about family engagement in schools and family engagement in other organizations that can give us an idea of what we need to be doing here in Hawaii to get our families more involved in school in a way that makes sense for them. And now that I'm done saying that, I'm going to close our poll so we can see who's here. And I think you guys can see the poll results. I hope. And Katie, you'll have to tell me. I'm only seeing my own thing. But it looks like we've got engagement from the college and university level, from administrators. We even have a couple of graduate students. Awesome. And NGOs and community members, which is really great. Okay. All right. So the next part is actually just for our panelists and our guest speaker to introduce themselves. So I'm actually going to hand it over to Bernadette. Bernadette, if you could say just a couple of things about you, just so that the group can meet you.
Okay, well, thank you. And I'm so thankful for this opportunity. My name's, like she said, is Bernadette Anderson, and I'm located here on the mainland in Illinois. And actually, I'm really excited to share with you some of the research and some of the best practices that we've been using for probably the last 18 years that I've been here with the Academic Development Institute. And I look forward to sharing with you some of my experiences in working with Indigenous cultures, along with African American cultures, Hispanic cultures, Central American cultures, a lot of different individuals and teachers. And so I'm eager to learn as well about more about the work that's going on over there. And I'll share a little bit more about myself during the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Bernadette. Emmy, could you introduce yourself?
There we go. Kasalelia, greetings from beautiful Ponape. My name is Emeliana or Emmy Musrasrik-Carl. I'm actually a founder of the Micronesia Resource and Research Institute. It's a newly chartered non-governmental organization based in Ponape, and now that we recently got our charter for all the FSM states, we're very happy about that. It is a one-stop center that provides pre-departure cultural orientation training for our FSM citizens, as well as anti-human trafficking awareness raising. And I'll go more into depth about that, but I was very much interested in hearing what Corinne said about the challenges that our citizens are facing in Hawaii, not just in Hawaii, but in other U.S. territories. So I'll go into a little bit more detail later, explaining about the type of the modules or the courses that we offer for this program. So that's my NGO work, my volunteer work to the community. But I'm also working as the director of the Court Administration for the Federated States of Micronesia Supreme Court. And the courts here also are very much involved in what goes on in the communities. So, I'll go into that as well in terms of the type of programs that the courts are doing, in terms of helping our students, prepare them to embark into a higher education in college or universities. So thank you for having me, and I do look forward to this panel discussion. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Emmy. We're really looking forward to having you on the panel too. We're glad.
Thank you.
Jojo, can you say a bit about yourself?
My name is Jojo. I recently joined PREL about 2 months ago. Before that, I spent 5 years working for the Legal Aid Society of Hawaii while I was a full-time graduate student at the University of Hawaii in the College of Education. Recently graduated in December of this year. I see that one of my advisors is on the list of participants today, and I want to say hi to Dr. Kathy Radliff. She's done a lot of work around the same topic too. A couple of her articles was widely used in citing in terms of work to deal with community engagement between schools and Micronesian community, specifically the Chu community. I also work with several non-profit organizations, ad hoc organizations basically run by Micronesians. We have our one-stop center called We Are Oceania. I think Kathy, one of our counselors, is also on the call today. And also Kofa Community Advocacy Network, which follows, tracks, policies and legal concerns that legal work that concerns Kofa citizens here in Hawaii. We recently created our newest organization. It's a nationwide grassroots organization made up of community advocates who are Micronesians in places like Arkansas, Oregon, Texas, Arizona, and here in Hawaii to start out. So I'm from Chuk. Hopefully I'll be going back to visit this summer, and it'll be, it'll be fun to see what's going on there. So thank you very much for inviting me to this.
Thanks, Jojo. And last but not least, for sure, is Natalie. Natalie, can you say just a little bit about you?
Of course. Thank you very much for having me on the panel. It's an honor to be on this panel next to so many people that I respect so much. So it's good to be here. I used to be a school leader in the Marshall Islands, both for public and private high schools. And then I've been working within in Hawaii since 2011, including work within the Micronesian diaspora living here, but predominantly with Marshalese. I do want to note that last Saturday was an opportunity where we were able to honor Marshalese students in the public school system who were on the honor roll. We recognize about 55 of them who had earned a 3.0 or higher here in Hawaii. So I come from an assets-based narrative when I'm doing this sort of work, because I think there are some really wonderful things going on, and often we hear about the negative. So I'll try to highlight a lot of the positive things going on today during our talk. So thank you very much for inviting me to be on this panel.
Great, thanks so much, Natalie. Thanks for bringing that perspective.
Okay, thank you. I'm so glad to be here today, and I am excited about the information that I'm going to share. And hopefully I'll talk a little fast so that we can get enough in here in the 20 minutes. And then if I need to clarify anything, I'll do that too, okay? So as I was sharing a little bit about myself, I've been doing this work probably since I've got out of college. And I started my work in family engagement as a parent myself, recognizing that there were a lot of things that I needed to know. Even though I was educated, I was not educated when it came to helping my children at school. So that's a little bit about how I started this work. I want to talk a little bit today about what can we do to help teachers begin to explore how they can work with parents to address the curriculum of the home. And I'm going to integrate in some examinations of cultural ways that teachers can also connect the schools and the families so that there's student success. And hopefully when I get done, you'll be able to define maybe some next steps if you are working with teachers in school improvement or if you are a teacher yourself. So that's a little bit about the way that I'll approach this. Let's see here. Well, I don't know, for some reason, maybe Corinne, maybe you need to jump in here and help me because there's not a link here. And it seems like I'm just going. Okay, well, it's over. Do you have control, Corinne? Can you help me there?
Okay, I'll take control.
Yes, please do. Okay, so I'll just kind of keep talking while she's doing that and getting us back into the PowerPoint. Sorry about that. I think that when we start talking about working with teachers and working with schools and working with children that are of different ethnicity or even cultural ways, beliefs, I think that you have to, you know, as a teacher, this is where I always start talking about where you dig in deep into the art of teaching, that pedagogy, the way that they teach. And before you really can just start telling teachers, oh, these are best practices for family engagement, these are things that you should do, we really want to start talking about how to start asking those reflective questions, how they begin to, how they are honest with themselves. And I kind of use this word of dig, you know, dig in deep into themselves when you start working with people that are different from you. And really the 3 Ds, I define that as common language. What are the 3 things about common language that we need to talk about with teachers? And the definition of common, what does that mean? What's common for me here in Illinois is not necessarily common for people in Idaho or people in Hawaii. There's differences in common, and there's differences in what beliefs are that are common. And so there has to be this understanding that there's a common language among the definitions and among the differences. And we have to work to determine then what is that common. And we do that by beginning to ask those reflective questions and being honest with ourselves. So, okay, Corinne, if you would like to click to the next one. But before we can really start even, you know, continuously to figure out what our next steps need to be, the 4 I's are what I call building inclusive classrooms to support families. You know, really getting teachers to recognize that there are implications to what they're doing for future generations, giving them a big picture of how they're going to impact local economies by what they're teaching and how they're teaching, and then also helping them to understand that the influence of their own personal story comes into play as they're teaching, and recognizing that that's powerful in and of itself. It's not tangible, but it's actually an influence that's very powerful. And then really recognizing that they're investing into the families, into the culture that they're working with. It may be different from what they know, but yet they're making an investment that's going to actually impact generations to come. And then the 5 Gs. This is really where I think where we're getting into the digging part of the cultural knowledge. You know, recognizing that, you know, they have to get information and they have to go participate with the families that they're working with or working for. And then also the importance of garnering support of their peers in doing this work, so they're not left to feel isolated or alone, and they have someone to bounce ideas off of. That is really important as they gather this cultural knowledge of the students and the families that they're working with. And then gather strategies. Find out, you know, what does work? What do we know from the research? In education, it's pretty clear that the research tells us that family engagement, parental involvement, the researchers have come together and have determined that there is a difference that it can be made when we engage families. And then the last one, greet others. That is so important. You know, learning how, it was so wonderful listening to you greet others in the beginning, and using the language. The language is so important that we sometimes forget that. We think that, you know, just if we're in mainstream America, that everything's hello. But when we start working with other cultures, we learn that, you know, from where I'm from, the Nez Perce tribe, you know, we would greet people in the morning by saying Tots Mewi. We speak the language, and that's powerful. And so I include that here because I think that's really important for teachers to learn, that to greet others is gaining cultural knowledge. Okay, Corinne, the next one. So as we're working with teachers, before we even really can get into the research and start saying these are the strategies, we want them to dig into themselves and find out where they're coming from with this work. And then also helping them to recognize there's challenges to this work. You know, it's not easy, it's messy, it's school improvement, it's building a system that embraces a culture that may not have been there. I think it was, someone made the comment earlier about the shift and the change in the numbers of students that are filling the classrooms now. And you don't have time to go and recruit and change your whole teaching staff. You have to work with the teaching staff that you have there. And so recognizing the challenges that, you know, there are definitions that mean different things to different people. We have to have that conversation. I worked with a school in Appleton, Wisconsin, that within 3 years, it was predominantly Caucasian. And in 3 years, it was a Hmong population that was predominantly in the seats of the kids in the school. So that's really important. Eye contact, different cultures, you know, have the respect that you look each other in the eye, but then there's some that respect means that you don't look them in the eye if it's someone that's older than you. So understanding that those are challenges. The body language, the clothing that you wear, those are important things that I think sometimes, you know, when you're teaching, when I was in the school arts principal, she expected us to be dressed up every day, or sometimes you don't feel that way, but she was adamant that communicated to our parents that we thought of ourselves as professionals, and that was the way that she built her school community. In other schools, if I travel out to rural communities, and it's a different clothing that the teachers attire that they're wearing. That's so important. Social behaviors. You know, sometimes when you have gatherings and you have the school and the teachers together and you may be sharing a meal, there are social behaviors that are acceptable, and then there are some that are not. And learning what those are, learning what those customs and beliefs are for those individuals that you're working with is so important, but it's a challenge. It's not going to just happen because, you know, we invited them and they came. It's going to happen when we actually do something, and that's what we're going to talk about next. What can educators do? Okay, Corinne, thank you. So when we start thinking about what can educators do, we start to talk about putting the research to work. We know what the research tells us about working with families. We know what the research tells us about working with Indigenous cultures. We know what the research tells us about working in school improvement. But when you put all of that together, what does that really mean? Well, it means that we have to take action. We have to identify one strategy, and then we have to implement that one strategy. And sometimes we think educators can handle multiple, you know, do all these different family engagement things. No, we want them to focus in on one and then implement that one, and then have some collaborative conversations about that one strategy that they're doing in their classroom. And then we want them to refine the approaches that they're using in their classrooms, aligning them with their expectations. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what those actually look like. Corinne, if you want, you can go to the next one. So when we start framing this conversation about the curriculum, about family engagement, We know that the curriculum of the school is managed by the Department of Education has an influence, the Hawai'i department has an influence, the local schools, the local school board members, the administrators, the teachers, all of them are coming together having an influence. But when we start talking about the curriculum of the home, which I'm going to define as those identifiable patterns that are in the home, when we look at that curriculum, we ask ourselves, well, who's managing that? Well, actually, no one's managing that but the family. And the family may not even refer to those patterns as the curriculum. And so that's what we're going to dig into a little bit here and talk about what I mean by the curriculum of the home. Okay? So the curriculum of the home's not anything that I created. It's research that my boss, Dr. Sam Renning, did back in 2000. And it's actually consists of 3 parts: the parent-child relationship, the routine of family life, family expectations, and supervision. And we're going to break those down, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how a teacher can actually implement those strategies. Personalizing this now, of course, to the different cultures that may be in the seats of their classroom, and remembering that they're working on behalf of other cultures. So we want to personalize the teacher's approach. Okay, Cory? Okay, so when I start talking about the identifiable patterns of family life that contribute to a child's ability to learn, I'm talking about what it is that the parent and the child do in relationship to one another. Okay, I'm talking about like specifically how the parent interacts with the child at home as it pertains to learning. When I'm talking about the routine of family life, I'm talking about what patterns can we see in that life of that child when they go home that happen on an everyday basis. And then also those family expectations and supervisions, those are changing. We have seen the digital tools come into our home, into our classrooms, and it's changing the way parents now are expecting their child to behave with those tools. And we're also seeing a change in the way that they're supervised. Okay, Cory? So let's get a little specific here and talk about the parent-child relationship. So family visits to libraries, museums, cultural activities, those are things that are very valuable to the family. And so as a teacher, I would want to find out maybe where are those historical sites? What are those cultural activities that the child actually is engaged in? I would want to learn more about those things. Also, the daily conversations about everyday events, that is so important. What's that conversation that happens at home with the parents and their child about what happened at school? You know, there's going to be an influence if the teacher is able to identify a strategy to impact that conversation. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Expressions of affection. That is so important. For some cultures, it's acceptable to greet and hug, and some to give a kiss, and for some it's not. And, you know, we have to accept the fact that as we are talking about expressions of affection, we need to find out from our families, what does that look like? One thing that I used to do, because I knew all kids like chocolate kisses, and I would take that little chocolate kiss and I would say, here, go home now and share that with your mom. Okay, I give them 2 sometimes, but give them a kiss so that they could have a tangible something to take home, and then the child could initiate the conversation. That expression is so important. So many kids come to school and are not hugged and loved, and that was one that I did. Family discussions of books, newspapers, is so important. Encouragement to try new words, expand vocabulary. I was with a group of tribal people last week, and one of the things we talked about trying new words was that, you know what, the way that people talk is something that's very sacred in their homes. Words that they use that they may not use outside the home, that they may be using in their first language. Those words, you still want them to expand their vocabulary in their own language as well as in English. And so finding strategies, asking parents how they can help to do that is very important. Okay, the next one, Corin. When we talk about, the routine of family life, this is really, to me, a very important part when we start talking about studying. You know, we really want kids to come to school and be ready to learn, and then go out and go home and be able to communicate what they learned at home to their families. And so talking to parents about having a formal study time. You know, times have changed. We have a more rigorous curriculum. We have higher standards. We have more of a demand on family time. And so helping families understand that, you know, there's a certain time that you can have for studying, and it may not be right after school is okay. But helping parents understand that whatever time that they pick, that if it's a formal, consistent time, that's what's important. Having a daily routine to sleep, eat, you know, put the phones down, have dinner at the table, whatever that routine may look like. If I'm not familiar with that culture, then I need to go out and I need to ask people, what does that look like? To have a quiet place to study and read. We encourage parents to just pick up a book in front of your child. Being able to model that in front of kids is so powerful. Regardless of where you come from, reading is fundamental. Is that commercial? Also, having a family interest in hobbies, games, educational value. You know, nowadays that we have the technology everywhere, that we seem to be using that more than actually board games or hobbies or things that may be more culturally appropriate for the adults, but maybe it's losing in terms of attraction to the students. So how do we help families begin to build that rapport with each other around those cultural values that may begin to be lost as time goes on because the language is lost? They begin to get involved in a new culture, because at school there's a new culture going on. It's not the same, and we have to begin to bridge those gaps when we see them. Okay, the next one, priority given to schoolwork. It was interesting that as I was reading and preparing for this webinar and learning about the Micronesian people, that there seemed to be a long history of a value that they have for education. And so that was really exciting to learn that. Also, the expectation of punctuality. I was sharing that I was with the tribe last week, and they said that, you know, for punctuality for them, you know, it's a roundabout time. You know, we sometimes think that, you know, 7 o'clock is 7 o'clock, and they made it clear to me, well, our chief says that it's about that time. And so it may be about 7, it may be about 7:15. Accepting that is important. Parental expectations for children to do their best. That is so important. And I think from all that I've read in the reports about the dissertation on the charter school and some history from like the 1950s about the Micronesian, it seemed like the culture just really embraces children doing their best. And so that, I think, is a very good strength that teachers can build on. Okay, so let's talk about a little bit here about what can teachers do then, some real concrete examples. Oh, I still have more here. Okay, so correct and effective use of language, whether it's their own cultural language or whether it's the English language. That is very important, especially because parents need to understand it translates into writing. Monitoring peer groups is important. The joint analysis of technology, I think that's an area that's growing, and I think that we're seeing a lot more of how information of how parents can help their kids understand and process what they're seeing, helping them to understand that, you know, they need to look at how much time is being invested in technology, and then looking at whether or not that use of time is a good use of time. Because obviously if the child is maybe looking to go on to become a gaming expert, then it may be a good thing. But then if it's not, that's not the goal for that child, that's not what the child's really interested in, is just playing, then, you know, we want parents to be able to analyze that as well. And then also, of course, parental knowledge of the progress the child's making in school and personal growth. That is really important as well. So those are some of the things that when we're talking about the curriculum of the home, that those are the patterns, those are the things that we can influence as educators. Okay, so what can a teacher do? Okay, and I picked just one. There's several different, you know, categories that we can go into, but I thought school home communication would be one to start with, specifically the parent-teacher-student conference. How can I, as a teacher, influence that? And so not just, you know, the traditional, the parent comes into my classroom and I give them a report, but how do we get the student engaged in actually leading that conference so that the student's prepared to share with mom or dad and the teacher exactly how I thought I did, and then actually some things that I'm working on to improve. That way, then, when the parent comes in, they're seeing their student being responsible for their own education, and then they're going to be a little bit more relaxed and inclined to get into a conversation with the teacher about what's going on in the classroom. Also, how we send homework home and report cards home. Is it just a, you know, a one way, here's what, you know, the homework is, you know, let your kids do it and return it? Or is it something that's actually helping to communicate in a two-way communication form that is asking the parent for feedback as well? Report cards as well. I saw one school that actually, when we first started researching this and we were looking for best practices, we actually had a school principal that said, you know what, I don't want a report card anymore that asks the parent to sign. I want the parent to actually give us feedback on how well we're doing at the school. And I thought, wow, that's courageous. And it was a totally different culture that she was coming from and that she was working in. And you could see where, when she brought the parents together and started designing the report card in a different way, that the parents then really did take ownership. And I believe after it's been about 12 years now, that they still have that same report card and still work to improve it. The school newsletter is a great way to use for two-way communication. Not just telling parents about what's going on in the school, but asking them, you know, what's important to you? What are some of your values that we can learn from? What are some of your customs that we don't know? What are things that you can do to maybe enhance our school? Asking for them to be able to give input. Asking for their perspectives on things. The open door parent-teacher conferences, you know, having an open door policy. The school belongs to the parents. That's really a foreign concept sometimes, but they do belong to the parents. We want the parents to come in. And so we want to remove any barriers that we can for that mom who may only have a certain amount of time to get to that school. We want to do that. Parent bulletin boards are another way that you can create to not only communicate outwards, but asking parents to drop ideas in a little pamphlet or a little envelope on the board, asking for them to, you know, do different activities, having word searches, return it here, those kinds of things. Home links from the classroom. You know, not only having a lesson in the early grades about phonics or phonemic awareness, but having an activity that links that activity to the home, and that the parent signs off, the child signs off, comes back to the classroom, and the parents are able to share. I mean, well, they're not there, but they're able to share their perspectives on that assignment, and the kids are able to talk about it with the teacher. And then, of course, assignment notebooks, which I think we're all familiar with. But making sure that all of these things are culturally appropriate. Okay? I'm trying to watch I'm almost out of time here. Anyway, so kind of closing up, wrapping up, I think that we can work towards helping teachers be a little bit more effective in working with one strategy that can influence the home, examine cultural ways that they can connect schools and families so that the students will be more successful regardless of where they come from or what social economic status that they are in. And then helping them to understand that then your next steps. Just pick one strategy, do that one strategy well, and then move on and integrate another strategy. Okay? So I will pause there and thank you for your time. I hope I stayed on time.
Yeah, you did great. Thanks, Bernadette.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right. So I think we're going to share the slides. So you guys, if you are interested in these resources, that'll be included. So we're going to get to the panel discussion, which is great. And I'm actually going to stop my sharing so that we can more easily see each other, sort of. But I think that if, yeah, Natalie and Jojo and Emmy, you're there. Yay, great. So I can see your faces. Okay, so we were just gonna get into the questions. Bernadette, thank you so much for getting us started and sharing that background on curriculum of the home. So if it's okay with our panelists, Natalie and Emmy and Jojo.
Yeah, but you know how some classes are really good about backwards mapping it, going backwards and seeing.
That's right.
Seeing what they need for the rest of the year. Val has
Okay.
Too many people talking at once.
Yeah, I don't know who that was. Okay. All right. Anyway, I'm going to ask some questions to our panelists. So if it's okay with you guys, I'm going to take turns with our panelists. I will direct my first question. Actually, I'll start with Jojo, and then I'll give everyone else, you guys all get a chance to reply. And then for our participants, if you have questions or comments, there's the chat box, and Katie's going to be keeping an eye on the chat box for questions. So
I'm click on me first. Click on Natalie. She looked like she wants to talk.
No, Jojo, you're the
Jojo, it's you first. All right. Well, this will be good. But yeah, everyone else, he's going to keep an eye on the chat box. So if you got questions, go ahead and put that in the chat. Okay. And then Bernadette, too, if you want to respond to these questions after our panelists, then you're definitely welcome. All right. Jojo, are you ready? My first question.
No, but go ahead.
Yes, you're ready.
I'm just kidding.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, so my first question to Jojo first and then to all of our panelists. In your experiences in your work, what challenges do our Micronesian and Marshalese families face as they try to get involved with their children's education? And are there specific community values that that really guide how families and that makes sense?
I think you gotta trail up a little bit on the second question. I couldn't because it's kind of cut up.
Okay, sorry. I'll repeat both. So what challenges do our Micronesian and Marshalese families face when they try to become involved in their children's education? And also, what community values are guiding how families get involved in their children's education?
Oh, okay. Yeah. First of all, I wanted to comment, Dr. Anderson, for such a wonderful presentation. You know, as you were talking, I kept thinking about all the issues that are facing the Micronesian families here in Hawaii. I must also say that I did my dissertation. For my dissertation, I followed 3 families, and it's a special ed dissertation. So, you know, I followed 3 families of children with significant special needs who were born in Micronesia and moved here. There are some common themes that I can point out that also maybe relate to the rest of the Micronesian population and Marshalese population here. So one more thing, if I don't include Marshalese and I just said Micronesian, I tend to put 2 together because my background is just like we consider everyone like together and historically and culturally. So my apology to my Marshalese friends if I tend to not mention Marshalese, but I think of you both. I mean, Marshalese and Micronesia. One of those things that I come across is and let's talk about challenge first, is there are common issues that Micronesian families are facing here in Hawaii. And that has to do with the fact that they are here under the Compact of Free Association. So there's no other way that Micronesian families can travel into the U.S. and Hawaii without avoiding, and avoid that designation. If you're here since 1986, you are here under the Compact of Free Association, and there are certain restraints that you, under your status in the U.S., sort of affected. With the three families, one of the common issues that I ran across is that all three of those families were homeless at some period in their lives, with their children, in the shelter, and basically also just moving from families to families. So it took a while before they were able to get on their feet. They were able to put into public housing. So one of those things that I see that are challenging in the Micronesian families in the way that they engage with the school is issues like housing, just work. It's a new immigration. It's a new group of quote unquote migrants here in the U.S. So they tend to struggle with things like work, finding housing. Sometimes parents may not be able to get off work to come to to come to the school. Sometimes they have other challenges that are related to that, the access to healthcare. And these are major issues among the Micronesian populations here. Equal access to healthcare that they're able to utilize, but also culturally as well. The way that families view schools and their place and responsibility to school. Back home, teachers, parents, are told, you're the parent, and the children are with you up to this time when they go to school. And what happens in school is, that's the prerogative of the teacher and the principal and those people over there. And that, since parents have limited English language skills or even awareness of what is being taught in schools. So those parents who come of that, that age group or from that background, when they come here to Hawaii, they tend to not participate in their children's school education or even the school environment because they feel that they're not what should I say? It's not in their place, first of all, and second of all, they don't have anything to contribute to that. Now, there are also parents who came here as students and are having families here and they're having children. Those tend to be more. They tend to participate more in their children's education, and they go to parent-teacher conference. They actually file complaints, and they actually go to the school and complain about certain things. But the ones who just moved from Micronesia to here tend to kind of like to hands off from education. That's not something that it's their prerogative to, unless they are being told or are being welcomed by the schools, and that's been the issue here. Like, how welcome do they feel, by the school, that they must come in and participate? There's a lot of tension, racial tension and discrimination among, against Micronesians here. And that also works itself down to the school. So when Professor Anderson talk about clothing, for example, let me point out a way that as we have these Micronesian skirts, and women wear these nice skirts, and they did it all over the place. It's very popular among the Micronesian and Marshalese families. But it has become an item of discrimination against Micronesian. So even when they wear, if we are to respect their clothing as a reflection of their culture, that has actually been flipped the other way, where in school, that has been an item of discrimination where, because it's so pervasive in the larger community, where, you know, the Micronesian skirt is a quote unquote kind of like an identifier of Micronesians. And that's sort of like put them, you know, in a precarious situation of discrimination. So yes, there are families who are, you know, who are not as educated as the ones who were born or going to school here and they're having children, and those are the ones that we're having a hard time for them to get into. But I think, by and large, just the perception of them being welcomed in the school, you know. The school environment being welcoming, you know, to the parents. So words get around of incidents and events where, you know, Micronesian children are being discriminated against, and you know, those are kind of the items that sort of, I mean, the things that prevent Micronesian parents from fully participate. But also, I also want to go back to my first point, because I don't want this to be lost in the fact that this is a new group that is struggling financially and struggling with health access. So those things prevent parents, and it's important for school officials to be sympathetic to, or at least to know that if a parent, you know, if a parent doesn't show up, it doesn't necessarily mean that he or she doesn't care about the education of it may be that he or she has challenge with transportation, somebody to watch the other kids, and then there's the other issue of language barrier. Do they have enough language skills to come in and feel comfortable, you know, engaging in the school? So it's a multi-layer issue that I think it's often lost on educators and school officials here, that, you know, these parents may not necessarily that they don't want to be involved. First, they don't feel like they have the capacity to be involved and contribute to something. And then there's the issue of being welcome, you know, in the school by by the school environment.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Joe.
Sorry, did I take too long?
Oh, not at all. No, thanks for getting us started. That was really great. And I wanted to give Emmy and Natalie a chance to add to your thoughts. Do you guys Emmy or Natalie, do you have anything that you wanted to add to what Jojo had said?
I have some things, but I'll defer first to Amy.
Hi. I just wanted to add on to what Jojo was saying. You know, for the Federations of Micronesia, we call ourselves one country. But what should be noted here is that we're really four states, four different languages, four different cultures, different tradition. And so if we add Marshalles to it, that's even more. So Marshalles has its own language, different culture and tradition. So the challenges of us, quote unquote, Micronesian coming to the United States is even more challenging, even within ourselves alone. And Dr. Anderson was talking about sharing her experience, you know, her research on the differences, the challenges that people have in terms of the culture and tradition. That's one of the things that are the main reason why I founded this organization called the Micronesia Resource and Research Institute, because to really combat some of these issues that we have for our citizens going into the U.S. territories, particularly in Hawaii and Guam, because that's where majority of our citizens are. You know, it's been said before about the Compact of Free Association. It is a privilege given to us, and I'll focus on the Federations of Micronesia, And really, that's a privilege that is given to us as citizens under the under the Compact of Free Association. However, you know, with those privilege of free migration in the United States, we can live indefinitely, we can work without having a green card, comes responsibilities. And so that's really one of the main focus that we provide under our program. It's the pre-departure cultural orientation training. It's a 2-day workshop, which also includes anti-human trafficking awareness raising. And what we cover is we call it starting your journey. So basically, what is it that you need before you travel? You need a passport. So we invite our friends from the immigration to just talk about what happens, how do you obtain a passport? When you lose your passport in the United States, what do you do? You know, so we cover all of that. And then our airlines, United Air friends would come in and talk about the do's and the don'ts on the plane. Now, you know, we take it for granted that everybody understands. Everybody knows what to do when you're traveling. But every time we go through these trainings and we get the testimonies from our audience, the people that have attended the courses, they share, you know, their scariest moments or most embarrassing or the funniest. And, you know, we keep notes of those. And the highest in terms of the problems or the challenges that our citizens face is on the plane. Getting stuck in the laboratories. I mean, this may sound funny to you, but, you know, we're used to the flush toilet on the plane. That's not the case. You know, it's a push button, where a lot of people don't know about that. And the door you're sitting there and then someone barge in, because we're not used to the sliding doorknob, you know, the latch. We're used to the doorknob. So these are some of the challenges. Or we have, you know, the mothers talking about getting involved or getting in trouble because they spank their children, they quote discipline their children. You know, so things that we get away with here or acceptable in our culture are not accepted in the United States. So those are, education is one that we cover in our pre-departure. There are 9 modules. So I'm just going to go through the passport on the plane, education. We teach our, you know, the folks here that even the school teachers and the principals are trained to detect a child that is being abused. So if you leave a bruise on the child, that child can be taken away from you. If you know, or if the kid is not dressed properly or has any sign showing that he or she has not eaten well. So these are, and you know, the community responsibility. I went through the slide, Dr. Anderson, so I saw a lot of similarities there. To be a good community person, get involved in the community, know where the libraries are, where the events and the activities are, and get involved, be good citizens. Finance, Jojo talked about the homelessness. Some may be a choice, some probably not. And from what we learned is we're not used to seeing a big fat check, let's say $1,000. We all of a sudden think, okay, that's a lot of money, not taking into account your rent, you know, the utilities, the food, and all of this. So these are challenges that our citizens face, and we really need to continue this awareness raising, making sure that people understand it's a different world out there. Even though we have that right or the privilege to come to the United States, we also have that responsibility. You know, the culture, that's one thing that we talked about. Employment, there's no such thing as Micronesian time. You know, that was mentioned. And the clothing, that's also one of the things. And anti-human trafficking awareness raising is one of the courses that we offer as well. We've had victims or FSM citizens, Micronesians actually, that have become victims of trafficking. So this is something that we also offer. The laws and the role of police, We sadly to say, we've had quite a large number of our citizens currently in jail. No excuses, but I think if only they were informed of the differences in the in the laws, especially. A lot of the actions that they committed probably could have been prevented. You know, the age of consent, the statutory rape, I believe it was in Guam, there's a high number of our citizens in jail that are being charged with statutory rape, but we also understand that it has to do with the age difference. The age of consent in Ponape is 14. I believe Chuk just raised their age of consent to 18, if I'm not mistaken. But in the most US states, it's 16. Age of consent is 16. So, you know, I'll give an example where a father came to my office and really needed help because her son married, there was a customary marriage here, and the girl was 15. So they left, went actually in Hawaii. So she gave birth only to find out that she was underage. The proud father came in and not knowing that he was going to be arrested and be charged with statutory rape because she was underage. So these are some of, you know, the issues that we faced. Not only that, but then there's deportation. There is nothing in place here by our government to handle deportees. Now, from our trainings, the deportees that have attended the trainings have said that a lot of times they're not aware of, you know, they opted for a deportee to be deported because that's seemed like the best offer made at that time, that they couldn't afford for an attorney, and they were told that they were going to get a free ticket home. So therefore they opted for that. But then when they want to come back, not realizing that, you know, that's their one-way ticket and that it was going to be difficult for them to return to the United States. But not only that, we're also now facing this challenge of, you know, the criminal, the convicts, those with hardcore cases that are roaming around on the street, and our government, our nation don't have anything in place to care for them. Some are need medical attention or counseling. And we don't have that in place. So the challenges are on both sides, you know, coming to the United States, and then those that are returning to our countries, that now has become an increasing challenge for our government because we really don't have anything in place to take care of that. So yeah, I think I hope I covered some of that, but the training, who attends our training is mostly students. They're mostly students. We work closely with the College of Micronesia, where we offer this training for free for the graduating students, those that are coming to the United States. It's a 2-day workshop. We go to the communities. The women are involved, the elementary schools. So we really have a lot more requests than we can handle at the moment. Summer is coming up, and that's really the high peak of our trainings because everybody wants to attend the training, and it's free. Now, there's nothing in our government regulations or rule that makes this a requirement. And so it is not a mandatory that you take such course before traveling to the United States. We've worked with the government, and this is something that the national government is looking into to see how they can work with NGOs such as mine to make this sort of a prerequisite or a requirement. So before a passport issuance, or if you're a new traveler, that you must attend such training. So that's something that we're very optimistic about, and we're looking forward to it. We can only do so much in terms of awareness raising and helping the community, helping our citizens to prepare, you know, to understand the do's and don'ts of living in the United States. But challenges are always there. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Emmy. Yeah, I mean, the work that your group is doing, it is making a difference. So thank you so much. I wanted to give Natalie a chance to respond with your thoughts.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to highlight one of the things that Jojo had talked about. He said, I think he phrased it to say that some of the parents don't feel like they have much to contribute in the school setting because they really sort of defer to the teacher. And that was one of the things I had wanted to talk about too. And I'll just actually step back a little bit more broadly, and that's that expertise is really well respected. I can at least speak for the Marshall Islands, but I think that's the case across the whole Micronesian region. And so people, because expertise is so well respected, that's the reason many times that parents want to defer to the teacher. They don't want to come into the school very, too often, because then in a way that's a little bit like showing the teacher that they don't respect them because they don't trust them to do their job. And so that was the way that at least I've sort of experienced it, where parents will tell me, Natalie, you're the educator. You're the one who's gone to school for this. That's your place. My place is to do something else. And so, and part of the research, I sent some links to Katie, so I think she's going to share those with folks. But one of the reports that I did was called, let me get the title of it, Effective Teaching in Cross-Cultural Settings, Comparing the Values of Parents and those of the expat teachers in the Marshall Islands. And one of the things that really showed up differently is that the teachers felt like parents don't want to be involved in school at all. But the parents actually responded on the survey that they wanted to be quite involved, so that it was something like 11% of teachers thought that parents wanted to be involved, whereas 56% of parents expressed that they wanted to be asked. But what they did not want to be asked to do was to come in and do, say, story time, where they were expected to read from the book in the library, or they didn't want to be asked to, do one-on-one tutoring with the kids that are struggling in math or something like that. What they wanted to be asked was to somehow share their expertise. And that's for a couple of reasons. One, that shows that the school values their expertise and has respect for them, that they have dignity in this. And what it also does is it allows them to come in with some confidence, because when they're being asked to participate in something that they're really unsure about, and they don't have that sort of knowledge or background, that's a very uncomfortable thing. And it's kind of puts them on the spot. I mean, nobody wants to be asked in front of a group of people to do something that they're not good at, but particularly, people here in Hawaii that are already discriminated against, that already know people don't want them here, that already know that people think that they don't have a lot to contribute. So if the schools could recognize the particular expertise or skill set that the parents do bring, then that's a way to sort of make that connection a little bit better. So maybe the issue I found when I was a school principal, we really had success when we were doing, say, school cleanup days. We were preparing for a big event like the graduation. The parents would come in, they would plant, bring in plants, put them all over, they would decorate, they would clean the area, whether that's mowing the grass or physically cleaning the tables, all of that stuff. And they would come out for hours and hours and hours to do that, because that was something that they were good at, something that they knew that they could provide. And it was to prepare for a community event. So it was a way to show their ownership over this place where their children went to school, whether that was for a graduation or maybe a Christmas, holiday concert, something like that. So having them be involved in a way that's kind of recognizes their skills and knowledge is, I would say that's one way to make that link a little bit more effective. Another thing that Bernadette had mentioned that I wanted to comment on is she gave us 5 G's, and one of those G's said, go participate. And that I think is really important, because in some other research that I did, and this is going to be another link that Katie sends out, we did a feasibility study for opening a Micronesian culture-based charter school here in Hawaii. But as a part of that feasibility study, we conducted focus groups in Maui, on the Big Island, and here on Oahu, to talk with parents from across the diverse culture and language groups of Micronesia to find out, what is it that you want for your children in school? What values do you want that school to have? And kind of how would you want it to be structured? Why would you want your kids to go there rather than stay in a regular DOE school? And one of the values, one of the things they wanted for their children that just came up over and over again, both in the women's focus groups and in the men's focus groups and across all of the islands, is that they wanted the teachers to smile at their children. And as an educator, that was heartbreaking, because I think, obviously, if this is something that they're saying, it means that their kids are experiencing the opposite, which doesn't surprise me because I see it all the time. But that's a really simple thing. And to me, that's a part of that go participate. They just want like a familiar face that's friendly. So if that's smiling in the classroom or showing up at something like the Marshalese Education Day that I mentioned yesterday, being that one teacher that shows up to an event like that and the kids kind of seeing them over and over again. Maybe that teacher shows up to the, to the Constitution Day softball tournament also. And they just kind of make themselves familiar to the community. That's another way to really bridge that gap between the public school and the home life of the kids, is to have that familiar, friendly face, that's the teacher that the kids can then trust and have a relationship with. Because in the third link that I think Katie's going to send you, as a part of my dissertation work, I documented a Marshalese Indigenous Learning Framework, which is basically, for those of you in Hawaii, you're probably familiar with the Nahonua Mauliola, which is the Indigenous Learning Framework for Native Hawaiians. But this one is for the Marshall Islands context. And the first step of that is relationship building, which is the first step of most culture-based educational initiatives, is building the relationship between teacher and student and between the students in the class. And so part of that, I think it was the third G that she mentioned, is really important. The last thing I'll comment on right now before we get to your next questions was also that Bernadette mentioned eye contact and how that means different things in different cultures. And I know when I was first a teacher, I was one of those teachers that didn't know what the heck I was doing in this context. And students wouldn't look at me and they wouldn't look me in the eyes. And I interpreted that as the students being disrespectful or being checked out, or why are they just sort of sitting back in their chairs like this and kind of looking to the side rather than looking at me. And now that I've been involved a lot longer with this community, almost more than 15 years now, I recognize that actually is a sign of respect, because looking in my eye means that they think they're equal, or they think that they're better than me, or they think they're not showing me respect as an educator who has expertise in this area. And so sometimes teachers in America are interpreting something that a child is doing to show their respect. They're interpreting it as being disrespected. And because of that misinterpretation, I think that's what often does lead to the not smiling teacher, or the teacher that says these kids just don't care, or the teacher that says these parents don't want to be involved. I really do believe that often it's a misinterpretation of nonverbal communication in many ways. Or you're asking a student, do you want to do this? And the kid goes like that, and they're raising their eyebrows to say yes, and the teacher just keeps repeating the question, and the child thinks that they keep answering, and yet the response is not being heard. And so that causes these situations where the teachers get upset. I mean, I'll speak for myself. Like, I used to get so frustrated. I one time, said to a student, would you just answer my question? And I didn't silence myself. I said the F word in a high school classroom because I was so frustrated. And then later, of course, not my proudest moment as a teacher. And I learned that the students were answering my question. I just didn't know that they were. And so it's partly also, letting the teachers know how to interpret these things. So that's all. And there, I have a lot more to talk about if you're interested, but I'm going to end there and wait for your next question.
All right. That was an awesome example.
May I just add one more thing before we move on to the next question? I think in general, the idea, the competing expectation between school requirement and then cultural values of the students and their families for things like funeral and church. And these are very important things to this cultural group. And it's something that is almost like non-negotiable. So you have a non-negotiable cultural event versus non-negotiable school requirements. Then there is no way, the student get caught in the middle And depending on what the student or the family decides, then, you know, it loses one way or the other. So instead of trying to mitigate that, those differences, you know, for the students and making it easier for the student to not to have to make those hard decisions where he or she comes out, you know, losing on one side or the other. So I think in general, the idea of cultural recognition of cultural values is very important. And I want to, thank you, Dr. Anderson, also for, you know, pointing that out. Thank you.
Thanks, Jojo. And I think that Natalie and Jojo, you both made a really good point about that mismatched expectations and just how frustrating that can be for the students. But given Natalie's example, it's very frustrating for the teachers too. We know that it can be painful almost to that level of frustration, painful. I wanted to ask a question from the audience. Actually, Katie passed a question on to me. And so one of our audience members wants to know, how is schooling different in Micronesia? How is schooling in Micronesia different from the US? And what can we do and integrate here that is fundamental to how education works in Micronesia? And it might be, what can we do to incorporate, what can we incorporate here that helps our classrooms be more inclusive, helps establish that common understanding, like Bernadette was talking about.
I'll let Natalie answer that question because she was a teacher and I can just say something.
Well, Jojo's also a teacher, so I don't know why he's deferring to me. I think he's trying to give himself more time to think, which is what I was hoping to have. But I was just scratching some notes as you were saying that. One of the things, so I was a vice principal at a public high school and a principal at a private high school. And in the public high school, one of the things that we did regularly is if there was a funeral, like Jojo is saying, there are these things that are truly non-negotiable for families. And our public high school had 300 kids in it. So this was not a tiny, 20 student institution. And we would, when someone would die in the community, we would cancel school for those few hours and the entire school would go together to the funeral. That's how important it is there. The principal cancels it and we bring, bags of rice from our school cafeteria to give to the family of the person who died. Now, I don't expect that a school in Hawaii, you're not going to close Farrington for a day to go to a funeral, but for the school to somehow understand that the student isn't cutting class, or it's not that the parents don't value the school, but to not just to give them an excused absence, but even to say, to maybe say to the student, gosh, I'm really sorry this happened, and maybe, ask about the situation, rather than sort of punish the student for being gone, to not, to sort of not ignore that this student has just lost someone in their community. The student might not know the person well, because that's the thing, people don't just go to the funeral of maybe their grandparent. Within a US culture, it's probably going to be an excused absent if your sibling dies or your mom dies or your dad, but probably not for your mom's auntie's brother-in-law's second cousin, right? But in this community, it is important to go to the mom's brother-in-law's second cousin's funeral, right? So that's something that would be important, I think, is to, when the student comes back, to acknowledge, I recognize that your community suffered a loss. We're happy to have you back. If you want to talk about that, you can. But then the thing is, one of the things that I would say that doesn't happen in a classroom in the Marshall Islands, that happens all the time in classrooms here, that is pretty damaging, is that here we often will sort of put students on the spot, right? As a part of our classroom management training that you receive in America, is that if a student seems to be like they don't know about something, you're going to call on them, right? We'll say, oh, Jojo, would you like to answer the question? I see that you've fallen asleep. Or, oh, Amy, I see that you didn't do your homework. Why don't you come to the chalkboard and show us how to do the problem? That's a common thing we do in the US. But in that population, you could really embarrass the child. And one thing that I recognize in that there was actually a research project at Baldwin High School in Maui about is that if students are embarrassed, they'll just drop out of school. You know, particularly in the high school, I'm talking, not small kids, but if you really embarrass a teenager in front of their peers, they might just never come back. And there, you know, some teachers in Hawaii say, oh, well, I talked to them one-on-one and I apologized. But at that point, it's too late, because it's not about the teacher and that the teacher apologized. It's about the student kind of losing a huge amount of faith in the community. So that's one thing that it has to be prevented. It can't be repaired once it happens. And so I think thinking about, you know, how would you structure a classroom in the US to do that? You know, part of it is making the effort to talk to the student one-on-one later about it, or maybe writing a note to the student and handing it to them later about it, but not to call it out in front of everyone. So being sensitive to that kind of an issue is really important.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, and to me that all of that stuff goes back to that relationship building. Like it has to be a close relationship. Where my principal in the Marshall Islands, the biggest thing I ever learned from him was he said at a sort of an opening meeting, he thanked the parents for trusting us to take care of their children, and to be thanking the parents for allowing us to be another parent in the child's life, because we were at a boarding public high school. So really thinking of yourself in a sort of familial way with the students is very important. That's a difference between classrooms there and classrooms here.
Yeah, if I may also just pick up on that point, the idea of familiarity, and I think it sort of breaks down this concept of tension with students. And then it's important, like you said, greet the students and show that you're interested, and make them familiar with you and you familiar with them. And I think I'm sure all of you educators also know the difference between, like, having group work versus like that one-on-one where you call on a student and you're not really sure if the student's and like Natalie said, actually putting the student on the spot. So group work is very important with in culturally, group work is, it's important, but also modeling, role modeling for the students. It's very important, and I just lost a train of thought there for a while that I was going to add. It'll come back in a few minutes. So yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
All right, how about I'll let Emmy, do you have anything that you wanted to contribute to?
Yeah, thank you. One of the differences, the question was how different is it, the schools here in Micronesia as opposed to the United States? Well, one of the major differences, our language that are spoken used in the classrooms are mixed. We have the private schools and the public schools. Well, the private schools, at least here in Ponape, require that all the students speak English. Good or bad, we're not sure, but now with education, they're now requiring that the local language is being taught at the elementary level. So you have this mixture of children that are confused because the education is requiring them to speak English because that's how they can live in the United States or elsewhere. However, they're losing our culture here. And that's a major challenge that we're faced with. So we have children that are speaking English. The young generation now can express themselves fully in English rather than in their own local language. My grandchildren, their first language is English. My children, it's 50-50. If I start speaking to them in English, they know I'm serious. They know I'm serious about something that I want them to do. And so, unfortunately, we're losing that culture. So the follow-up question is, how can we establish this understanding and how can we work together on this? it's not, there's not a one size fit all solution, and it's a really challenging thing. But I'm just sitting here thinking whether we have a sort of a Micronesian culture training in Hawaii, you know, or in the other U.S. territories. Looking at the NGO that I run, I'm more focused on preparing our citizens for better transition into the United States. But do we have such thing for those that are already, the diaspora that are already living in the United States? Do we have such thing that are, I believe so, with the We Are Oceania. Jojo, you may confirm this, but I think that was the same one-stop shop, one-stop center that provides sort of similar training for our citizens that are living there. Now, the other question that I have is, what about teaching the Americans to understand, this is on the flip, you know, can the education in Hawaii formulate some sort of a training for U.S. citizens or Americans to understand more about the FSM culture? I guess, you know, that's the question that I will give back to the panel, and, you know, to McGraw, whether is it possible to have a Micronesian culture training specifically for teachers, you know, where schools are with our FSM students. And the other thing is to have a like, not necessarily a tutor, I'm not sure the exact term for it, but to have sort of a maybe one-on-one where a high upper class is assigned to a, let's say, Micronesian student to help mentor, you know, that student, not on a daily basis, but kind of a friend thing, where if I have any questions, because for young children, they would rather deal with their peers, go to them for assistance than the teacher or the principal. So yeah, that's my view on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Emmy. And I think that question about, like, is it possible for Hawaii DOE, or probably more likely like NGO type service providers, to be offering an opportunity for community members, for educators to deepen their understanding about the new Micronesian community here in Hawaii. I think that's an awesome question. I think that's something I know on the PREL side for sure that we're really trying to get to, because we do see that as a need. And I'm sure we could say the same about REL Pacific, really trying to think about like how we can make that happen. So, but I want to thank you for posing that, because I think that goes back to Bernadette's question, the thing that she left us with which was next steps. What's our next step? And I think for some of us, that might be one of our next steps for sure.
Can I just jump into that? So there's a lot of that work already happening, actually. I don't know, it's not as widespread as I think it needs to be, but groups like Micronesians United Big Island, they've been very active at providing those types of trainings. I know that Dr. Mary Hattori has led multi-day workshops with teachers at public schools, sometimes invited by individual principals, other times in partnership. She did, I think, 2 years in a row, a multi-day workshop during spring break, where teachers flew here to Oahu and they did a professional development course on providing culturally sustaining education for Micronesian students. So I know that Epic Ohana, that organization, has done some of that kind of work. So I know some of it's been there, and I think We Are Oceania has done some. I've been invited into some schools to do that kind of work, but it's in terms of a systematic training that all people at DOE get, that nothing like that has happened. I don't know that any topic though gets that type of systematic PD for teachers. You know, it's more, maybe a complex area might do, you know, a focus on a particular literacy strategy, and then all the different schools bring in the trainers to do that. But that's something that it would be great if PREL and McREL wanted to help with. What I've found is that most of the time when we're asked to come in and do it, they need it to be done for free because there's not funding for it. When I mean, I've been on the other side in schools. I know that there's funding for professional development, but I know that the times I've gone in and my friends who have gone in, never funding. And so I think that's an issue, because it's kind of like we value this training, and so we're willing to pay those trainers. But on this issue, we're going to expect the Micronesian community to do it for free. So I think that is kind of a paradigm shift, you know, that this isn't just a nice extra, this is critical to student success. And if you look at this as critical to student success, then you fund it for your teachers and you require your teachers to be there. That's what I'll say about that.
Thanks for that. And I feel so bad for having to draw a line in the sand a bit, but we are past our time, and I want to thank those of our participants that have stuck with us past our time. Because I feel like I could go on with you guys for a while about this, but I hope that this won't be our last opportunity to talk. And so for those that are still online and for those listening to the recording, hopefully you'll be engaged in any future events. But I really want to thank our panelists. I want to thank Bernadette, because I'm sure I can speak for our participants, because I learned a lot. This was a really great opportunity to hear about you know, what's happening in the research on curriculum of the home, and to really get a chance to scratch the surface, maybe, like we didn't even really get to dig into it, about what's happening here in Hawaii, and the ways that the challenges that our Micronesian and Marshalese communities are facing here, and what people are trying to do to bridge our community so that we are, again, one community, Pacific Island community. But I think that'll be it. I'm going to give it back to Katie if we have some logistical wrapping up things.
Yeah, no, that's it. Thank you so much to our panelists. I pasted a link. I'll paste it one more time for the feedback survey. We would really appreciate your feedback as we are planning future events around this topic, and we can get more specific and more practical. So we would really like your feedback through the online survey, and we will be sending out a follow-up email as well with links to the resources that Bernadette and Natalie had mentioned, and also We Are Oceania and different service providers in Hawaii that can help teachers that you'll be able to share with your colleagues. So thank you all for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. Thank you. Kalangan. Bye.
Bye.